This is a story called The Queen Bee. Once there was a king who had 3 sons, and the 2 elder sons left home and went off in search of adventures. But they fell into a very wild and disorderly way of living. And so the king sent the 3rd son, who was called Simpleton, out to look for his brothers. Simpleton went off into the kingdom, and eventually he found his brothers. But they laughed at him and said, "How do you think you'll get on in the world when we who are so much cleverer than you could not?" But Simpleton persuaded his brothers to travel home with him, and so the 3 of them went off together. And they travelled over hill and dale and hill and dale. And one day they came to a great giant heap, a sandy-coloured heap. It was an ant heap, and the 2 elder brothers said, "Let's kick the ant heap apart, and then we can watch the little ants creeping away in terror." But Simpleton said, "Leave the ants in peace. I will not allow you to disturb them." And so they travelled on, over hill and dale and hill and dale, until they came to a great big lake. And on the lake there were swimming many ducks. And the 2 elder brothers said, "Let's kill a duck, and then we can roast it and eat it for our dinner." But Simpleton said, "Leave the ducks in peace. I will not allow you to kill them." And so they travelled on, over hill and dale and hill and dale, until they came to a forest full of trees. And down one tree there was dripping liquid. And when they went close, they saw that it was honey. And they looked up and they saw that there was a bee's nest at the top of the tree. And the 2 elder brothers said, "Let's build a fire under the tree and smoke the bees out, and then we can take the honey." But Simpleton said, "Leave the bees in peace. I will not allow you to burn them." And so they travelled on together. And then they came to a castle. And when they entered in the yard of the castle, there were horses, but the horses were made of stone. And as they entered the castle and searched through its many halls, there was not a human being to be seen. Until finally, at the end of a long corridor, they came to a door. And in the door there were 3 locks and a little pane of glass. And when they looked through the pane of glass, behind it there was a little grey man sitting. So they knocked, but he did not look up. They knocked again, but it was only when they knocked a 3rd time that the little grey man came. He opened the locks on the door and he brought them in. He took them to a table that was laid out with a great feast, and they ate and drank. And then they were taken to a bedroom and left to sleep. And the next morning, the little grey man brought the brothers to a stone tablet. And on the stone tablet there were written 3 tasks. And if those 3 tasks could be fulfilled, the castle would be delivered from its enchantment, and all that had been turned to stone would be turned back. Well, the first task was to go out into the forest, and there in the moss under the trees was hidden 1,000 pearls. And the pearls all had to be collected by sunset, and if not, the seeker would be turned to stone. Well, first it was the eldest brother's turn, and he went out seeking the pearls, but by sunset he had only found 100, and he was turned to stone. The next day it was the second brother's turn, and he went out to search for the pearls, But by the end of that day, he had only found 200, and he was turned to stone. The next day, it was Simpleton's turn. And Simpleton went out to seek the pearls, but so difficult did the task seem that he sat down on a stone and began to cry. It was while he was sitting there crying that he saw coming towards him lots of little creatures on the ground, and they were led by one a little bit bigger. It was the king of the ants, and the ants had come to help him find the pearls, the ants whose lives he had saved from his brothers. And they gathered together all the pearls because ants know how to work as a team. And thus the first task was fulfilled. And Simpleton was taken back to the stone tablet. And the second task was read. He had to go to the nearby lake, and in that lake there was hidden a key that would unlock the king's daughter's bedchamber. Well, when Simpleton saw how big the lake was, he did not know how on earth he could find a key there. But then he saw swimming towards him ducks. They were the ducks whose lives he had saved from his brothers. And the ducks began to dive down into the lake until one of them came up with a key in its beak. And Simpleton took the key, and it unlocked the bedchamber of the king's 3 sleeping daughters. And now he had to fulfill the third task, and this was the most difficult, because he had to distinguish those 3 daughters and say which was the youngest and the sweetest. And this was no easy task, for the king's 3 daughters all looked exactly the same. Well, as Simpleton sat there looking from one to the other, he heard a sound. Bzzz, a sound at the window, and in through the window there flew a little insect, a bee. And of course, this was the queen bee whose life Simpleton had saved from his brothers. And the bee came in the window to help him. And this was essential, because there was only one difference between those daughters. And that was that the evening before they had gone to sleep, they had each eaten a different sweetmeat. The eldest daughter had eaten some sugar. The second daughter, some syrup, and the youngest daughter had eaten honey. And the queen bee buzzed around the room and buzzed until finally the bee alighted on the lips of the youngest and sweetest daughter that had eaten the honey. And thus the third task had been fulfilled. And the 3 sleeping daughters woke up, and all the humans and the animals in the castle that had been turned to stone took on their natural forms again. And Simpleton, well, he married the youngest and sweetest daughter, and the 2 elder brothers, well, they got the other 2 daughters, and they all lived there together in the castle. And in time, Simpleton and the youngest daughter became king and queen of that land. And if they have not died, then there they are living still. And that is the story.